Well, I'm still learning much about marriage, so I wouldn't consider myself an expert. And to a certain extent, having been married just for 5 years, I feel a little ill-equipped to really speak on the topic. But I think, nonetheless, it is an issue and a topic that we all need to bring it to light and really talk about and say, what is marriage? Yeah. Now, I could look at Genesis 1 and 2 or look at the books, the letter by Paul, 1 Corinthians, or even look at the book of Galatians and Romans and give you a talk on marriage based on what the Bible says about marriage. But I suspect that it's not going to be something that would be helpful for us to gain a hearing in the public square. So even as we look at the whole issue of marriage and family, as we look at how we can defend marriage and family in the public square, you'll notice that my notes, there's no reference to any scriptures. Okay, that's not because I have backslidden. I haven't taken a few months off of work from RZIMAP, but because I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about just are really reflections on what the Bible teaches about marriage. And this is essentially what we talked about when Brian talked about the Christian worldview. We need not necessarily go out there and use scriptures, because you would find that that's always self-defeating, because the Bible says so. It's not going to grant us any hearing. But rather, if we look at philosophical reflection on some of these issues, and also biblical reflection, but expressed in terms that our friends would listen to us. Our friends who are not Christians, who may not subscribe to the Bible as we do, as truth. So that's the disclaimer that I want to begin with. And I want to say that today there is a culture war that is waging in the world. And one of the many things that are being fought about is marriage. Now, you may think that, that's not a problem here in Singapore, but I would disagree with you, because even a society as conservative as Singapore is not exempted from this conflict involving the institution of marriage. Yeah, and mind you, the ongoing debate, some of you may have read, about this debate that's especially ongoing right now in the US. This debate is really not much ado about nothing. That is, it's not merely a disagreement about the term marriage. It's not just merely a disagreement of how the word is being used. Over here, I concur with Maggie Gallagher. She's the president of the National Organization for Marriage in the United States. And she has a great website. If you, I think it's under my footnote there. This is what she says. She says, when people dismiss the fight for marriage as only a fight about a word, they are revealing that they do not understand what a culture war is all about. It is largely about fixing the meaning of words. So what she's saying here is the culture war that we're involved in here is about the fixing meanings of words. What does freedom mean? We use that liberally. Right? In Christ we have freedom. The US went into Iraq, in the name of giving them freedom. What does freedom mean? What does equality require? We talk about equality of the sexes, which, by the way, I think it's even problematic to talk about equality of the sexes. There's another topic for another day. What does equality require? What is marriage? I did a dipstick survey. You see, one of the really wonderful thing about social networks like Facebook is that you can put on your status, what do you think about this? And people will all comment, right? So, it's not absolutely accurate, but it's pretty good as a dipstick survey to see what is the general view. So, in preparing for this session, I put out there and I say, something about what do y'all think marriage is? That's pretty clear. What is marriage, right? And I got all kinds of response, ranging from marriage has to be communication, open communication between husband and wife, and all kinds and all sorts, give and take, and so on and so forth. But none actually addressed what marriage is. except for one friend of mine who is Malaysian, but he's now based in New York. And being an artist, he thinks differently from the rest of the people. And he said, and he gave me a very short, answer. He basically says, marriage has been blown out of proportion by men and women in the world. That's all he said. And I was trying to, probe some more, and I wrote back to him. I said, elaborate. I'm listening. Of course, he didn't come back to me. Basically, an artist is you can take it as how you want to view it. So what is interesting to me is that the whole marriage is being debated so heavily in the U.S., and I believe that debate would soon arrive here, especially with regards to same-sex marriage. Yeah, but not many people have really seriously thought about what is it. What is marriage? Not how marriage would work, but what is marriage? This question of what marriage is very crucial because it underscores all other debates that revolve around marriage. And when I say debate about marriage, I'm not merely talking about same-sex marriage. I'm talking about from same-sex marriage to the increasing number of heterosexual marriages that are in crisis, even among Christians in Singapore. Interestingly enough, in the US, and I'm not sure whether that's still the case right now, in the US, the number of divorces among Christians are higher than national average. I was trying to see if I can get any, reliable statistics about divorce in Singapore, and, I was not quite able to get. I get some kind of average figure, but I suspect that's not what I really want to hear. It's not quite truthful, I believe. This morning, I want to focus our attention on two main ways that marriage is being understood, even as we contemplate the question, what is marriage? And then I will contend that only one of the views is the proper understanding of what marriage is the biblical view of what marriage is, what it's supposed to be. Okay? The first view I want to discuss is a more recent view of marriage. And this view is basically that marriage is merely a legal construct. Okay, now I'm not a lawyer. Okay, I'll leave Siket to talk about some of these things. But it is this view that basically marriage is a product of the law that produced and defined it. This means that it has no intrinsic essence or purpose. In this view, marriage does not refer to anything larger, or rather to any larger reality outside of the law that defined it. In other words, marriage is what the law defines it to be. The term marriage does not describe anything that exists out in the world. Rather, what it describes follows how the term is defined. Okay? What it describes follows how the term is defined. So let me give you an example. Marriage may now be described as the union between two people of the opposite sex. But it is so because we have defined it that way. Right? But if the need arises, we can redefine it. We can redefine it as merely a union between two persons regardless of their sex. If we have defined it in this way, we can surely redefine it some way else. Besides, some may even argue that the differences between the sexes are really not real. The distinctions, too, were constructed by our patriarchal social system. Again, that is topic for another session. Now, you may have heard of friends who say, why bother getting married? Because marriage is just a paper or an agreement legalizing or formalizing a relationship between two persons. Therefore, there is no need to get married if two persons truly love each other and are committed to each other, right? I don't know about you, I have friends who tell me that, who live a certain lifestyle and say, you know what, you don't have to bother getting married because if you're truly committed to each other, marriage is just paper. It's just a paper where you sign and agree to. What's important is that we love each other. Now, For those of you, I'm sure Switchy knows, we always show a movie or two when we have our reasonable faith weekends. That's why you saw a movie the other time. Brian and I, we love watching movies because we find that movies are great in communicating certain questions, and at the same time opens the door for us to discuss some of these issues. And recently, I happened to watch this movie called "He's Just Not Into You." I don't know how many of you have seen that. Yeah, Timothy has. Great movie. I thought it was going to be trashy because it was based on this book, that was written by this guy who, for those of you who are not familiar with the premise, basically, how do you know if a certain guy likes you or not, and how do you know when to get out of the relationship? Basically, that's the premise of the book. But the movie, when it came out, I was surprised by how some of the things that were being communicated in the movie was pretty good and very true. So in this movie, He's Just Not Into You. It talks about different couples in this story, and one of the couples is played by Jennifer Aniston and Ben Affleck, and they were living together for many years, I think 7 years, and Ben Affleck, because of his family background and his personal experience, where his family has got divorced and things like that, and he basically says, I don't believe in the institution of marriage, so as long as one person is committed to the other, and I love this person, there's no need to get married. I'm committed to you. And of course, the story goes that Jennifer Aniston, really longs to be married, and I believe that this longing is very real, and I believe that this is a longing that's really designed in us. It's not merely a longing to want to have it legalized, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. It's just intrinsic to our nature. Yeah, and so in this movie, Jennifer Aniston really wants to be married, and she was very frustrated, and Ben Affleck kept assuring her, but why are you asking this for me? Because I love you, I'm committed to you, there's nobody else, But clearly there's still a difference between a relationship that is within or without marriage. And I thought that the movie just captures that, something for you to watch in your free time. Okay, a lot of other pretty good stuff in that movie too. Anyway, so is it really true that if two persons are really committed to each other and there's nobody else, really, why bother getting married? I mean, especially here in Singapore, getting married costs a lot of money. And you have to apply for marriage license and so on and so forth. It's just a lot of hassle. Why bother? Because as long as we're into each other, that's fine. Let's just go on with life. We're committed to each other. Now, this view of marriage, is also sometimes referred to as the relationship model of marriage, where marriage is deemed as an essentially private, intimate, an emotional relationship that's created by two persons for their own personal reasons to enhance their own personal well-being. And I think, the story that I talked about is basically that. It's just between the two of us. There's really, we don't need any public recognition in that sense, as long as we love each other. Marriage is created by the couple for the couple. What is the government's role? The government's role is to legally recognize such unions for merely the dispensing of benefits and rights that are designated solely for married couples. Yeah, maybe tax break, and of course in Singapore you get, if you have a baby, you get baby bonus. If that is the case, then it's discriminatory for society and for the state to accept and favor certain kinds of intimate relations over others, right? For marriage has a legal form, but no specific content in that sense. After all, everyone has the right to socially and legally express his or her personal conception of family, sexuality, and intimacy on an equal basis, correct? And often the only qualification, the necessary qualification cited for marriage under this view is love, right? As long as we love each other, what's wrong with that? As long as we love each other, that's good enough. But the problem with this rationale is that there can logically be no boundaries then as to what really constitutes marriage. Because any arrangement or number of consenting adults can demand for the same legal and societal approval as natural marriage. And this includes, polygamy, which is something that we're familiar with, same-sex marriage, incestuous unions, pedophilic relations, or even bestial unions. People might say, you know, I love my dog, okay, and I want to marry him. Right? If love is the only necessary qualification. Now, it's evident that though love is vital in a marital union, it is not the definitional component of marriage. It is important. Love is a very important element in marriage, but it's not what defines it solely. Yeah, and this it's really sad because this is also a common view among many young people today, where love is a feeling. People go into marriages thinking that love is the only thing that's important, and they define love as merely a feeling. You know, it's sad, right? Because today the word love, and one of the wonderful thing about the Greek language is that they can specifically define the various forms of love. There's eros, there's agape, you know, so on and so forth. But when it comes to the English language, right, or maybe even Chinese, Mandarin, you know, there's just one word, love. You know, I can say that I love my son, or I love Brian, and at the same time I can say that I love char kway teow. But obviously it's a different kind of love, right? And I think today we've really lost the essence of what the term means, love, you know. And I've worked with a campus ministry here in Singapore where they use sex and sexuality as a campaign, evangelism or for evangelism. And I've given talks at campuses here in Singapore, and it's fascinating to hear from all these young people and how. Well, you've heard Lian, so you know if I would use a certain word, it won't shock you. How screwed up their understanding of what love is. You know, and that is really the case. Right here, right now, you know. So this view that love is the only necessary qualification, okay, that's the only thing that is important in marriage. And because this view sees marriage as created by the couple for the couple's well-being, it is also what we could call an adult-centered approach to the marital union. Because it's, after all, it's created by these two adults for these two adults, right? And it regards oftentimes children, at best, incidental to marriage. And at worst, it regards children as instrumental in fulfilling adults' desires by giving adults the right to create or acquire children. And that's really the case when you talk to a lot of so-called same-sex couples who want to legalize their unions because they want to adopt, right? Because somehow children fulfills the adult's desire to have children. Okay? And of course, in the case of same-sex marriages, it will be necessary that the child would either be fatherless or motherless. Because if it's, you know, if a lesbian couple, then it will be fatherless. If it's a gay man couple, it will be motherless. And inevitably, this view that marriage is primarily an emotional good created by the private couple, of course, has led many countries, people in different countries, to abolish the distinctions between cohabitation and marriage, and to legalize same-sex unions as marriage. Of course, in Europe, we all hear, right? Couples are cohabiting would have recognized, and they have certain benefits that come with it as well. And of course, to be fair, when marriage is viewed this way, where the term marriage is merely a legal construct and a word that has no intrinsic content, when you see marriage that way, then there's no issue in deconstructing marriage and redefining it in any way that reflects the lifestyle that we choose. Right? There's no problem with that. Of course, another view that is related to this is the view that marriage is a contract. Right? You hear people say, oh, marriage is a contract between two people. But is that truly the case? Does a contract accurately reflect the nature of marriage or the bond of marriage? I'm going to contend that we distort our understanding of the family when we reduce family relationships to merely a set of contracts. And I think that's a very common view today, that merely marriage or family relationships is just a set of contracts. That's why you hear of stories where children want to divorce their parents, right? Because they don't want to be young children, I'm talking about, not adult children, because they don't want to be under the jurisdiction of their parents. You can never divorce your parents. You can never get your parents out of your life. And I'm sure a lot of us are aware of that. There's no way, because their blood is in you, right? Now, marriage is indeed embedded within contracts, but it operates quite differently from a typical contract. The analogy of marriage as contract breaks down, especially when you consider the key elements of marriage: self-sacrificial giving to the other person and commitment that is involved in marriage. For example, even the most cynical would scoff at the idea that of a 5-year renewable marriage. Right? Let's have a 5-year renewable marriage. But renewable contracts are very common, right, in other spheres of our lives. But just the idea of 5-year renewable contract just doesn't make sense. Of course, prior into entering into a contractual agreement, we are also clear on our expectations from the other party, right? Before you enter into a contract with the other person, what you do is you're very clear what is expected, you're very clear what you want from the other person, and it's mutual, right? For example, reaching a certain sales or production target, and so on and so forth. Okay, these are things that can be quantified. Regardless of what happens, we expect the other person to honor the expectation, to fulfill the expectation, right? You've entered into a contract with me, regardless, unless it's in the fine print, regardless, you will have to fulfill this target or these expectations that you've signed on to. However, in marriage, attempts to specify expectation of performance would be impossible. Not to mention exasperating. And even in my 5-year marriage, I realized that already. I found that out within the first month. For example, before you get married, nowadays people talk about prenuptial agreement, right? And I suspect most of what's really indicated in the prenuptial agreement has got to do with the finance, right? Because expecting your husband or expecting your wife to be home by 7 p.m. doesn't really quite mean anything if he comes home and he sits at his computer and doesn't talk to you, right? Because attitude is involved as well. It's not just merely coming home by 7. And it's impossible to expect something like this. What if he's caught in traffic? Then he would be violating his contract, right? Now, the contractual part of marriage, now I'm not saying that there's no contractual part to a marriage. There is a part of marriage that is contractual, but it provides a basic framework for the couple to work out their shared life, and it gives basic provisions like the need for fidelity, that is monogamous, and the absence of violence, for example, that there can be no violence or abuse within the relationship. The spouses cannot attempt to specify in contractual sense just what they expect from each other, because one of the things those of us who are married will learn that we all grow over time, for better or for worse, and sometimes the other person will fall short of what is expected, and other times the other person would rise above what is expected. Now, if I were to enter into a contract with Brian before we got married, one of the things I guess I would not put on the contract would be, caring for Craig, for a baby, But in this case, he has risen above what I expected. Now, if a contract had been drawn, not expecting him to do that, two things. Firstly, he would not even attempt to do it. And secondly, he would not have grown as a person. So contract is problematic to use as an analogy for marriage. And of course, with the arrival of children, the difference between a contract and marriage becomes even greater. As mentioned, before you enter into a contract, what you do is the partners will carefully work out the exchange and look at what is expected, making sure that no one will be taken advantage of, and to assure each other that you will not take advantage of the other person, correct? Now, any one of you who is a parent would know that the parent-child relationship cannot be carefully measured that way. When a baby is born, nobody can possibly expect that the baby will meet any requirement or expectations. Because we all know that parents almost always never get a good deal from their children. Okay, they always have to give more than they receive from the child. When Craig was first born, he was helpless, and we just especially me, I just have to tend to him every 2 hours, either this or that, extreme sleep deprivation, postpartum blues, in exchange for finally, after 2 months, a little smile. That's not a great deal if you were to look at it from a contractual point of view. Because after all, if we required advance assurance that we would receive a good deal, none of us would ever have children. It would not make much sense to say that parents perform their parental duties out of contractual obligations to their children, or spouse, or to society. But they do it out of commitment, even when it's uncomfortable or costly to do so. I know, as much as I love my son right now, as much as I do for him, I know it is imminent that one day he will turn around and I say, "I hate you, Mom." He will. Maybe one day I tell him, go clean your room or something, or you're not allowed to use the car. He's going to turn around and say, "I hate you." If I were to measure all that, I would not be having him. And according to Esther, I've got a good deal, by the way. Isn't it wonderful to have children? So it would be a mistake for us to define marriage as merely a contract, for a contract would not capture the multi-layered essence of what is involved in such a union. Now, in contrast to this first view of marriage, which is marriage is merely a term or legal construct, and it is so because we have defined it to be that way, and therefore we can redefine it. In contrast to this idea of marriage is the second view of marriage. This is the view that marriage actually refers to something that is real out there, that is intrinsic to our human nature. Marriage actually refers to a pre-political institution that is prior both in time and in prominence to the state. Even before marriage was defined in that sense or described legally, marriage is a virtually universal institution. Now, cultural norms might be different all over the world, and it will influence the procedure. For example, in India, arranged marriage is very common, whereas in other parts of the world, like in Singapore or in the Western world, it's more of a courtship model of marriage. Right? Now, all these cultural norms may influence the procedure, but what is common among the variations is the fact that marriage has something to do with bringing a man and a woman into a public and not merely private sexual union where the rights and responsibilities of the husband and wife towards each other and any children that they may produce are publicly, not merely privately, defined and enforced. All right? And I suspect this is one of the reasons why most societies you find would have big wedding celebrations. Before, when I was younger, when I've not reflected enough on all this, on the whole issue of marriage, I used to think, marriage is just between a man and a woman. Why do we have all these big celebrations, right? Why should this auntie of mine who lives in, I don't know where, some small fishing village in Kota Baru, whom I've not met ever before, why should she be a part of my wedding ceremony or wedding celebration? It doesn't involve her in that sense, right? But I'm beginning to see that is very important, because marriage ultimately, yes, is between two persons, but it's not merely about two persons. It's also a public declaration of the commitment that you make. And family scholars have all pointed out that marriage exists in virtually every human society. Now, there may be exception of one tribal somewhere, and I read that there's a tribe in Africa that sort of have a different arrangement. But it exists in virtually almost every known human society, and as a virtually universal human idea, marriage is about regulating the reproduction of children, families, and society, and it is also a publicly acknowledged and supported sexual union which creates kinship obligations and sharing of resources between men, women, and the children that their sexual union may produce. How much time do I have? Okay. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm barely halfway through. Okay, virtually every known human society, marriage exists. Now, the obvious question here is, how is that virtually every society, distinctly and separately throughout human history, came up with the same version of marriage in that sense, other than how the procedures go? Perhaps it has something to do with our universal human nature that leads them independently to come up with some idea of marriage, perhaps? Perhaps it's something that about our human nature that leads to the same kind of institution that exists in every human society. Now, a few things about the nature of human beings related to marriage are very obvious. Okay, and I think we all know that. In every culture, men and women are attracted to each other. By the way, when I first met Brian, I was very turned off by his political views, and I never thought I would marry him. But God always is funny when it comes to things like that. Every culture, men and women attracted to each other, and they wish to commit to each other in a stable relationship and perform sexual acts. Now, you may talk to people and some will say, oh, I don't really want to be in a stable relationship. I just want to, just sleep around and have a free life. I don't think they're really being honest to the desire that is in their hearts. Okay, they may say that as a self-defense, or they may say that in masking certain things about themselves. Right? And when men and women, we all know when they have sex, they might make babies, because now in modern day contraception is so easily available. Therefore, every society would encourage men and women, ideally before they have sex, to form some kind of community that would be conducive for the flourishing of their romantic love and the children that may result from that union. As marriage is made up of men and women, all potential and actual mothers and fathers, it is child-centered. Remember the first view we talked about? It's adult-centered, because it's by the couple, for the couple, and children is merely incidental. But this view is more child-centered. This child-centered view of marriage has served in virtually all human societies to encourage men, women who may create a child to take responsibility for that child and for one another. And even those married couple who do not have children as a result of their marriage relationship, those who cannot have children, they can still provide a mother and a father to those who are otherwise deprived of that opportunity. Patrick Lee, he's the, I don't know if I have that quote in your notes, but he's the director of the think tank Witherspoon Institute's program on bioethics and human dignity. This is what he writes. He says, the marital communion of the spouses is both good in itself, so not just a mere means to bearing and raising children, and at the same time intrinsically fulfilled by bearing and raising children together. Genuine marriage is sexual in nature and includes a bodily union. This sexual relationship is intrinsically linked, indeed, fulfilled by the procreation, bearing, and raising children. This part about bodily union is very important, because people in same-sex relationship would also say, oh, we also have a sexual aspect to our relationship, but it's clearly different in nature from the sexual relationship between a man and woman. Now, allow me to elaborate. First, I don't think I need to draw in detail, okay, how our body parts work, right? Both male and female genitalia, they somehow fit each other. That is not the case for same-sex couples, right? In a heterosexual union, the bodily sexual acts are part of the marital union. You see, in all the other bodily actions that we do, like eating or digesting, walking, we are complete in ourselves, correct? I mean, we can eat and digest. You don't need any help from, your friend or your mother to help you digest your food. We are complete in ourselves. But when it comes to the act of reproduction, the male and female are incomplete by themselves. Unless you're an earthworm, which I believe none of us are. Though some atheists claim that we are, not much more important than an earthworm. The body parts of both male and female need to work together to procreate. We cannot do it on our own. Sexual intercourse, therefore, is what we call a unitary action, which man and woman complete one another and become biologically one. Therefore, when the Bible talks about when two become one, okay, this is what it's talking about. At least physically, of course spiritually too. Where male and female complete each other. And therefore in marital sexual relationship, this bodily unity is an intrinsic part, is a constitutive part of the couple's more comprehensive marital communion. Heterosexual intercourse, therefore, between a man and a woman within marriage realizes an essential feature of human flourishing, the good of marital union. And this good is only realizable when two persons involved are of the opposite sex. No other arrangement in that sense would realize this good. Now, so you may ask, if the institution of marriage had existed prior to its political recognition, why is there a need for government to legally treat this particular relationship differently? Why is there a need for the government to regulate it, for example? Why does it exist as a legal institution? I mean, what business does the government have in our private lives? What business does the government have in reinforcing or sustaining norms about people's private and intimate lives? Because marriage is a relationship that is intrinsically valued and socially important. Yes, that is true. But then if you think about it, there are many other relationships in our lives that are highly valued and crucial as well, correct? For example, I'm a sister to my sister. I'm a daughter to my mom and dad. I'm a granddaughter as well to my grandparents. And all these relationships are all personal and intimate, but the government does not regulate these relationships, correct? But these are all highly crucial relationships as well in my life. What makes marriage such a great exception in our adult relationships that it's state regulated? And again, I think as we reflect on our human nature, it brings us back to the same question. What is it about marriage that's got to do with our human nature? And why the state is involved? Consider the following about the way things are. Firstly, I mentioned this earlier, sex makes babies. Right? There's no dispute about that. Despite the advent of contraceptives, many young people are still ignorant about birth control. It's shocking to hear, even though in a modern society like Singapore, a lot of young people are still ignorant about birth control. And of course, there's this call about using condom, that again that's another topic that we can talk about, because merely the use of condom alone is not going to be good enough. Yeah. Now, we all know that contraception does lower the odds of getting pregnant, a young woman getting pregnant, but it does not eliminate the risk. Okay, every form of contraception would would still have a certain percentage of risk of unintended pregnancies. And that is still the case. Unintended pregnancies are still very common. Over and over again, I hear reports about in China, even in Singapore, and even in the West, about how young women would not use contraception one way or the other because the partner insists not to. It is very sad because a lot of young women get pregnant that way. I just read 2 days ago, I think. In fact, this is a very common occurrence in Malaysia, unfortunately, where school children, I call them children because they're all in secondary school, giving birth in school toilets. And a recent case was with, I think she's in secondary 3 or something, and the baby was born, and she put the baby in her bag, and she was so scared of being found out, and basically the baby died in her school bag, and it's very sad. Now, of course, you probably say, oh, that doesn't happen here in Singapore, right? Because a lot of them are being aborted. Now, that's another issue that we as Christians need to reflect and think seriously about, because there are still unintended pregnancies that are out there in Singapore. It is also common knowledge that babies who have the care and attention of both their mother and father are most likely to grow into functioning adulthood. And virtually every baby that is born to a married couple will have a mother and a father already committed to caring for him and her. If a couple who are married to each other and when they have a child, they're naturally committed to caring for the child. And most children in sexual unions that is outside of marriage will not. Hence, it's only in the interest of the state to prefer voluntary marital unions between men and women over other arrangements to care for the baby, including cohabitation. So 1, sex makes babies. 2, societies need babies. And I think as Singaporeans, you're very much aware of that. Now, reproduction may be optional for individuals, but it is not optional for societies. And for me, it's fascinating because this very important person of your country, being as smart as he is, did not have this foresight, right? And certain policies were implemented with regards to reproduction in Singapore. Because, historically, we see that societies that fail to have enough babies for repopulation will slowly cease to survive. And that is why the Singapore government is highly concerned about the low birth rates here and the fact that women are getting married later in life and therefore lowering fertility, or even not getting married at all. Now, I'm not sure if this is true, but I read somewhere that a certain very important political figure in your country at one point, as he was lamenting about the low birth rate, actually implied that polygamy may be the answer. Is it true?
Yes.
Okay, it's true. Now, did anyone make a hoo-ha about that? Yeah? Good. What is that?
His wife.
His wife. Good for her. See, I always knew that the wife was always smarter than he is.
He acknowledged it.
He acknowledged, yeah, in his book he acknowledged that, yeah.
His other advice was to marry a wife that's smart.
Yeah. So if every society, if it is to survive at all, they need an institution that encourages men and women to have children if they want them. Some people might say, oh, what about immigration? Migrate, having people come from other parts of the world, which is one of the things that is being encouraged here, migration. But even that, you need local Singaporeans who would help these foreigners to assimilate into the culture and into life here. Because if not, these people are going to go into their own ghetto, and it's going to lead the country the culture into a totally different direction. So your country, despite all the good and generous immigration policy, needs to repopulate. Young couples need to go out there and make more babies, and hence the baby bonus. Yeah. makes babies, societies need babies, and thirdly, babies need mommy and daddy. We do not need expensive studies to tell us that the condition under which children would flourish. They flourish if they're raised under the care of his or her biological mother and father who are married to each other. By regulating marriage as a permanent sexual union based on the fidelity of the spouses, the state is ensuring that marriage is preferred over other kinds of unions. The man and woman who made the baby are supposed to stick around to commit to taking care of each other and the child, and that is only possible in a legalized marital union, because cohabitation is not going to work. So as long as sex makes babies, as long as societies need babies, as long as babies need mommy and daddy, the state will need a legal and social institution to manage the procreative consequences of sexual attraction between men and women. Now I'm just going to say a few things about some related issues. What about cohabitation? I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I said people will say there's no difference between a couple who's married and a couple who is living together, as long as they love each other and are committed to the relationship, right? Now, there is increasingly more research that reveals that cohabitation is correlated with unhappiness and domestic violence. Okay? Not just one research, not just two, many. All right? Couples who live together report lower levels of satisfaction in the relationship than married couples. They report higher risk of domestic abuse by boyfriends than husbands, and children are more likely to be abused by the mother's boyfriend, even if the boyfriend is the biological father. Okay. In addition, if a cohabiting couple does get married, they have a higher tendency to divorce. Can you? And I don't think I need to elaborate. Can you imagine a relationship where both parties have one foot out the door and one foot in the relationship? What that does to the trust in the relationship. We cannot live that way. You cannot live knowing that tomorrow this person, no matter how much he says he loves you or are committed to you, could just walk out the door. I wouldn't want to have a baby with a person like that. I want to have a baby if I'm in a cohabiting relationship, when there's no guarantee that the husband is going to stick around. Because mother and child, there's a certain real bond, physical bond to the baby, but not the father so much. Right? In fact, research also shows that cohabiting adults more closely resemble singles than married people in terms of rates of physical health, emotional well-being, and mental health. A more recent study that was published in the February issue of Journal of Family Psychology reveals that couples who live together before tying the knot are more likely to get divorced than those who do not move in together. Which is very interesting, because people always say, you just want to live together to test and see, right? To see if it works. Then if it works, fine, we're for each other, then we get married. But the studies that have been done show the opposite. What is going on here? Because basically you cannot treat relationship as if you're buying a car where you can take it out for a test drive. Oh, it's great if you are the one who's buying the car, but it's not great if you are the car. Right? It doesn't work that way. And a lot of times, relationships where couples are cohabiting and then they eventually tie the knot, they do it for all the wrong reasons. They just simply slide into marriage, and then eventually they separate. What about same-sex marriage? I'm not going to say too much about this because I know CCAT will probably say more. But I do want to highlight a couple of things, because I think repeat will always help us to remember things. Now, you may say this is not something that's being lobbied for presently in Singapore, so we don't have to worry about it. But I believe that in due time, certain parties will start demanding that they have a right to choose whomever they want to marry. It's just a matter of time. Now, it may be arguably true that people have a right to live as they choose. Okay, now even that I'm not sure if it's really true. I mean, our rights as human beings have limitations and boundaries. Okay, now but still some people argue, we have the rights to choose how we live and who we want to, share our bed with. Now, Yeah, arguably true that they have a right to do so, but they don't have the right to redefine marriage for all of us. Right? Same-sex marriage advocates, especially in the US, insist that marriage is a civil rights issue where redefining the family is increasingly seen as a fundamental right. And it's very sad because they often will bring up the whole, how same-sex marriage's struggle is the same as the interracial, struggle, the times of the Civil War between the African American and the white American. However, as we have discussed, if marriage is not merely a word that we have made up. For example, we rightly call Fido a dog because he is a dog. Fido is not a dog because we call him a dog, correct? There's a difference there. Likewise, same-sex unions are not marriages just because we want to refer them as so. Okay? And using the analogy of dogs again, while some of us prefer cats, like Brian, and some prefer dogs like I do, most of us agree that cats and dogs are both domesticated animals, and they are to be tolerated. You don't go around torturing cats. I mean, I don't go around torturing cats. At least I've stopped. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. And they are to be protected. Just because I don't like cats doesn't mean I don't, protect them. However, we all acknowledge that dogs and cats are different. And it is confusing and false to suddenly pretend that a cat is the same as a dog because they have 4 legs. And because they're furry, right? And suddenly to pretend that a cat is the same as a dog, or that dogs have actually always been cats. You see how ridiculous it is. Yeah? Similarly, while heterosexual and homosexual relationships are both to be, again, arguably tolerated and protected in our society, it is wrong to suddenly pretend that there is no difference between same-sex and opposite-sex relationships, or that same-sex unions have actually always been marriages. It's just that we've never recognized it. And therefore, we need to redefine the word marriage to include them. And also, just because I happen to prefer dogs, it neither makes me prejudiced toward or intolerant of cats. Nor does it require that I must now pretend that dogs and cats are exactly the same, correct? Because we're all called bigots or intolerant when we say that, homosexuality is morally wrong. Historically, marriage has been defined as a protected civil societal union between a man and a woman. But today we all know homosexuals allege that any intelligent or reasonable person would agree that their sexual preference for homosexuality is a matter of genetic predisposition, and it's not likely that they have a choice. Right? You're a reasonable and intelligent person. You should know that homosexuality is something that the homosexuals cannot help themselves. Of course, this again is arguable. Nature versus nurture argument, right? So these people, they cannot help themselves. Therefore, society must redefine marriage to include these people. We shouldn't marginalize them. That's what's happening today. Tomorrow, perhaps, the bisexuals will assert that, any intelligent or reasonable person would agree that their simultaneous sexual preference for heterosexuality and homosexuality is a matter of genetic predisposition. I'm just born this way. I like men and women. So therefore, society must redefine marriage to include 3 people, 2 of the same gender and 1 of the opposite sex. Okay, and before long, people will claim that any intelligent or reasonable person, that's all of us here, would agree that the genetic predisposition for group relationships, whether heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual, is simply validating what society has already accepted, and therefore society must redefine marriage to include polygamy, polyandry, polyamory, etc., 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 which is really what is going on right now. Ultimately, the term marriage would become some relationship between some people. Definitions, particularly legal definitions, are used to help society clearly understand and communicate what something is and what something is not. And ultimately, allowing marriage to become anything results in it being nothing at all. How does that help anyone? What about polygamy? Brian mentioned about the interfaith forum that goes on in Malacca. I was one of the speakers at one point, and one of the students, I think he's from Sudan, and he basically was challenging me as a Christian, and he said, in Islam there is the provision for men to marry 4 wives, and by doing so we eliminate all the helpless women and needy women and widows in society. Basically saying that Islam is superior in terms of Christianity, because Christianity basically preaches monogamous relationship, right? Marriage is between a man and a woman. And just like the student that I encountered, many Muslim men and women alike, mind you, argue that Islam's provision of polygamy is a religiously proper alternative to adultery, divorce, and remarriage, and really a real answer to the many unmarried women who might otherwise have no chance at motherhood. And so thought your very important political person, right? Would that really work? Opponents of same-sex marriage since a decade ago at least had warned that if marriage were to be redefined according to the wishes of same-sex partners, proponents of polygamy would soon lobby to be legalized as well. And I think they will actually form a larger group. Which men wouldn't want to have more than one wife? Well, actually, I know of a lot of men who wouldn't want more than one wife. One is enough. If the sex of the participants is no longer relevant in marriage, why should the number be? Why? Right? And this has happened in Europe, and is right now happening in Canada, where they're basically bringing to court and trying to fight for this. Polygamy. In fact, there's some countries in Europe where I think in '93 same-sex marriage is legalized in some countries like Sweden and some other countries. And 10 years later, guess what? Polygamy is legalized. A sad but sadly true story, because some countries in Europe already accords de facto recognition to polygamy. This is a sad and funny story, funny but sad story, true story. A few years ago, a man by the name of Muhammad Anwar, he was stopped by police in Glasgow, Scotland, because he was speeding beyond speed limit. And over there, that would normally be an automatic disqualification for driving, because you were speeding beyond speed limit. So he had to appear in court. And appearing in court, Mr. Anwar basically testified that he needed to speed. He needed his car because he has one wife in Glasgow and another one in another town, and he sleeps with them on alternate nights. And guess what? The court was persuaded by the driving while polygamous argument and ruled that the defendant could keep his driver's license. We laugh at it, but it's true. It's sad. Driving while polygamous. What will they think of next? A wealth of studies has been done on the implications of polygamy, and they all similarly reveal that spouses, especially wives, and children in polygamous households are at a higher risk for physical abuse, abandonment, mental problems, financial woes, and a host of other socio-economic problems like divorce, single motherhood, and child delinquency. In Malaysia, there's an allowance, and I believe so. Same here as in Singapore. There's a provision in the law for Muslims to have 4 wives. Right? Of course, I think in Singapore it's more difficult because you have to apply for it, whereas in Malaysia it's much more easier. And guess what? The state of Terengganu, which is majority Muslims, has the highest number of single moms. Men are are not going out there marrying widows to do them a favor and take care of them. Men are divorcing one wife and marrying a next sweet young thing. You know, we're all fallen. That says a lot about our nature, the condition that we're in. Okay. Now you may feel that polygamy is a challenge, is not a challenge to majority of us and just a problem of a certain group. Well, the related problems of adultery and divorce continue to threaten the survival of marriage, of the marriage institution here. I'm sure almost every one of us would have heard of a friend, Christian, who's dealing with adultery of either the wife or the husband, and divorce is on the table. It's very sad, but it's true. So the call for us as Christians is to defend the common good, right? We talked about that. What can we do to defend the institution of marriage? Now, I think, we may think that this is so overwhelmingly big. What can we do, where we are? Well, I think there's some things that we can do, because contrary to what some people may think, the defense of marriage is not bigotry. The defense of marriage is about protecting the greater common good for everyone. What are some of the steps that we can take? Well, I have them in my notes, and I shan't take up too much of your time. Firstly, I think there is a great need, and this is what I want to emphasize, to educate our children at home and at church on sexuality, marriage, and the importance of family. When was the last time you talked to your kids about sex? When was sex last preached about from the pulpit in your church? When was the last time your pastor preached against adultery, lust, and the sanctity of marriage on Sunday? You may hear that, when someone is getting at a wedding ceremony. You don't hear really much about that on other Sundays. A few years ago, a television series called Big Love, I don't know if you're familiar with that, made its debut in the US. It was basically a program that propagated polygamy. Today, it's not even shocking or surprising to find movies or shows that glamorize the homosexual lifestyle. Likewise, as the church, we need to be smart and creative in our education and instilling our values as well, if we are to counter such propaganda. Movies. Some of us are called to be writers. Some of us we're all called to a different vocation. What can we do at where we are? I think at least at home, those of you who are parents, you can educate your children. And one of the things, and this is a personal opinion, the whole aware thing, about children at school being taught certain things about sex. And this is my take of it. You don't have to agree with me. If we educate our children about sex and sexuality at home, and if in school they hear something that is different from what you teach them, I have a strong suspicion that the children will come home and ask you, Mom, my teacher says that, a relationship between two men are perfectly okay, but that's not what you taught me. So who is right? You would know what is happening, right? You would be able to nip the problem at its bud. But the problem is sometimes as parents perhaps these are Asian values, but I don't think Singapore is that Asian that we don't talk about sex, but there is a need to, because if you don't talk to your kids about sex, somebody else will. Yeah? The TV will, popular culture will, movies will. And it's they're gonna instill different values about sex. Secondly, examine our own marriage. Does it glorify God? Third, volunteer or get involved in a cause or organization that promotes marriage and family. That shouldn't be difficult because, this is high on the Singaporean government's agenda. 4, petition against anything that threatens the institution of marriage and family. For example, we can all, we don't have cable TV, and so we are stuck with your MediaCorp channels, And sometimes it's very surprising that some of the shows that are being shown on national television. What can we do? Now we may say, oh, it's not going to change anything. No, I don't think so. You can write in, lobby MediaCorp not to show certain shows that would threaten the institution of marriage and family. For example, every half year they have this Victoria's Secret fashion show. Girls with hardly anything on walking down, the runway. Should these kind of shows be on national television? It's not even on national television in the US. It's only on certain, cable channel or something. What are Christians doing? What are we doing about that? We should be writing in and say, we shouldn't be having this kind of shows, because we know children watch TV, especially children in Asia. They go to bed very late. Singapore kids go to bed the latest in the world, by the way. Yeah. They watch TV, what can we do? There are a lot more that we can do, and we need to think about how we can be involved in defending family, defending marriage, because it is a God-instituted institution. And I would encourage all of us to really think about what we can do at where we are with regards to this, and to perhaps further understand what is marriage and how other people see that too, because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding or confusion about what marriage is, and I hope this has been helpful.